Okay, this is an addendum to our previous segment that we were talking about getting ready for the Rockford Game Convention. What I wanted to do at this point was to say that, and we've probably said this before, everybody has probably noticed that our detail on the war game table is nowhere near as wonderful and crazy detailed as some of the war games, either in videos or pictures that you may see. From a, I can't say it's a majority, but it's a good chunk of the wargaming population, the miniature wargaming population. And I should also caveat this to say that doesn't include the fantasy era or the fantasy realm. This isn't my focus is not on a Warhammer 40K or any of those types of games. And, uh, and these comments don't apply to that. What we see when we're looking at games set up by me and as a group or as a whole, Imagine Image Multimedia, is you see a hexagon. I don't want to say limited, but it is constrained. A hexagon constrained game layout. And what does that mean? It basically means that all your thinking for the scenery has to be around in and considering the hexagon grid, however big the table is. Oh, so what does that mean? It means that roads look the way they do, the rivers look the way they do, the hills look the way they do, and nothing looks hyper realistic. And because of this, excuse me, and because of these facts, you also don't see in often because we've learned that we don't have time to pick up super detailed items of terrain on the game table. So we do without. We skip it. But if we wanted to, certainly we could put bushes and all kinds of other details into our battlefields. And we could easily do that in three-dimensional objects, rocks, fences, and houses and buildings and so on. And we could have hills, especially in the regard to hills, that don't conform to the layering of that we have shown in the past couple of videos, well, many, of the foamies, 6 millimeter thick, stacked on top of each other, which essentially is what? It's a 1/4 inch cork, if you will. That'd be the popular thing. If you can't find foamies, cork would be used. But the problem, well, there are issues with cork. And so by having the access to the foamies, we made the layered hills. But these layered hills, for simplicity, for quickness, don't have the cut edges of the slopes. Not yet. And we could do that, and we may do that, but we just don't take the time to do it just yet. We make our shape, and then we make another shape, and so on and so on, and we make concentric circles, shapes, I should say, around the top shape, which has the hexagon grid on it. And then we just go around and we make bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to a realistic, theoretically realistic, layering of or height of the hill. Because again, in regard to the hill topic, remember, a hill just doesn't start like this. A hill top is the culmination of a sloping ground for many, in some cases, many distances, many yards and perhaps miles, or tens of 1/4 miles to get to the point where you have an elevation. And if you look at anything from Europe to, well, America is a little bit different geologically. geomorphically. The hills in a typical American Civil War battlefield or American Revolution, for instance, may begin very quickly, and the slopes may be very steep. Whereas you don't quite get that in most of Europe, except Eastern Europe, maybe less. The Balkans, you will maybe have something close to Virginia, but the fact of the matter is that the hills take a long time uh, to to uh, to be to become a hill. And in most cases, I shouldn't say most, but in some cases, you won't have hills. What you will have is indentations in an existing elevation. So, for instance, a river like has a bank because it's sunk into the ground. You don't have rivers sitting on hill on elevation. It's an indentation in the level, and a canal is an indentation for a distance on an elevation. But for us, the most we can do is always show flat until we get to the hill, and then that's it. But if you want to think of it this way, imagine if you had 4 layers of foamy throughout the entire table, 8 foot long, 5 feet deep. And the only way, or the one of the ways that you might choose to replicate an existence of a river is to cut a channel in those 4 layers at an angle. So you would take your knives or hot knife or whatever, but you would stick it at an angle and cut the shape so that it's flat, but then there's an indentation in the flat representing the river. And the roads could be on, but in many cases, remember, roads have ditches next to them. And that kind of the level of detail, we just, it can't be feasible. It's not feasible. So we just do what is feasible for us, and that's why, in closing, our tables look the way they do. And we could have lots of other things out there, bushes and single individual trees. We could have, ladders on the side of a house, barrels. We could have wheat fields of actual, filament type of hair of a carpet, looking like a wheat field kind of stuff. We could do all that. But the fact of the matter is, suffice to say, here's an example. What we're looking at is the fabric with the hex grid painted on it of a pattern of fabric that we got at Joanne's fabric store. And why did we choose that? Because that's like the floor of a forest. Without putting trees on, you can see that's the floor of a forest. Now, in some cases, you could say, wow, that is actually interesting. You don't even need trees, three-dimensional trees, just use a flat. And that's right. Because what you could do, obviously people do this, the entire battlefield could be a graphic, a flat graphic. In other words, it's just a big board game. It's just a flat board game. It happens to be 8 feet in this case because of the convention, 8 feet by 5 feet. But by no means is that our normal. A convention game, yes. But a game that we play here in our studio is 6 by 4. And as a matter of fact, that's big. We typically have gone to a 4 by 3 game table for almost everything. And did we change the size of the figures? Not necessarily, right? We still use 172 scale and 15 millimeter and 20 millimeter, whatever you want to call it. But generally, only in Hex Command Nova did we start to get into the 10 millimeter scale. And so therefore the 10 millimeter scale works on the same 2.5-inch hex as all the other eras, including World War II. The only big difference here is when we're talking about 172 scale, which after playing 10 millimeter, 172 is ginormous. A Sherman tank is huge, right? After all this time of playing Hex Command Nova in 10 to 12 millimeter, if you will, a Sherman tank is huge. Well, what does that mean? The buildings have to be a little bit bigger too. You can't really use 15 millimeter buildings with a 172 scale tank. You really can't. Because you have to come close, visually speaking, to the time-space displacement fact. So the trees, can they be the same trees that we're using now? Not really, which is why we keep some of our bigger trees so that we can flesh out the forests with big trees and small trees. So we don't have to invest in all big trees anymore. we're basically investing only in smaller trees, but the big trees we keep around to make it look somewhat close. And that goes to say, that also goes to the fact of fences. Fences, we don't have 10 millimeter American Rev or Civil War. We are in 172 committed for, all the time. So all of our fences are basically HO scale, and all of our buildings are basically HO scale. But for 10 millimeter, if we did have any 10 millimeter, we would have to have all new fences, walls, bridges, and so on. But essentially, as long as everything stays in a 2.5-inch hex scale, then everything should work. And if the bridge looks big, man, so be it. Anyway, so that's where we're at. And I'll finish this by saying we're going to certainly be there all day. November, is it 4th? Saturday at Rockford, Illinois. Yes, Saturday. Thank you.